Today's forum is about the conflict in the Middle East, and it's not according to the New York Times. Our panelists today are Dr. Stephen Zunes, Zach Weinstein, and we're going to start with Stephen Zunes, who's a professor of politics and international studies at the University of San Francisco, where he served as founding director of the program in Middle Eastern Studies. He served as a senior policy analyst for Foreign Policy in Focus project of the Institute of Policy Studies, and an associate editor of Peace Review and a contributing editor of Tikkun. He's the author of hundreds of articles for scholarly and general readership on Middle Eastern politics, U.S. foreign policy, international terrorism, nuclear non-proliferation, strategic nonviolent action, and human rights. And you've probably heard him many times on the radio. He's the author of Tinderbox, U.S. Middle East Policy and the Roots of Terrorism, Common Courage Press. And he's co-author with Jacob Mundy of Western Sahara War, Nationalism and Conflict Irresolution. And here we go, Stephen Zunes.
Thank you so much. And obviously, this is the horror that's been unfolding the last 3 months has been really hard for those of us who've been working on the Palestinian cause over the years and decades. But it's also heartening to see the outpouring of opposition and mobilization in the United States and around the world, including from many of our comrades and colleagues who didn't really do much on Palestine before, but now recognize its importance and centrality and are out in the streets with us. And so I'm glad to see you all here because we can never become too educated on this. And I wanted to discuss a couple issues that I thought would be of particular importance for a group of fellow leftists who are, already have sympathy to the Palestinian cause, because I think this information would help us thinking strategically and how we can better organize and try to change U.S. policy. I want to start off with the observation that unlike some struggles we've been involved with over the years, those of us supporting a ceasefire and are in the majority. Polls show 68% of Americans support a ceasefire, including 80% of Democrats. The Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Anglican Church, virtually every mainline Protestant denomination have come out for a ceasefire. Only the right-wing fundamentalists support continued war. And Frank, just a little aside here, I find it rather upsetting. I mean, liberals will be totally freaked out if Biden sided with the fundamentalists on LGBTQ issues or abortion rights or whatever, but he can side with them on war and peace. And not just on this, on Iraq as well, where we have a similar configuration. And he's coasting for renomination, but I'll put that aside for now. Also, overwhelming majority of academics specializing in the Middle East, including very mainstream international relations scholars. We've heard about the dissent memos in the State Department, walkouts of staffers on Capitol Hill protesting their bosses' support for the war. Even White House staffers walked out, had a vigil a couple weeks ago. I've never seen this kind of active dissent in Washington, D.C. on any foreign policy issue. This is really unprecedented. Among 18 to 30-year-olds, 72% oppose Biden's policies on Gaza. That is more than we saw in that age group in opposition of Bush's policy in Iraq, Reagan's policy in Central America, and Nixon's policies on Vietnam. This is an unprecedented level of dissent. And yet, Biden seems to be coasting to, renomination. And I think of the analogy, and some of us are old enough to remember being around in January 1968, Johnson was running for re-election, and I think we don't have a Eugene McCarthy, we don't have a Robert Kennedy, or at least a sane one, And I think it just really underscores, what many of us have had issues with about the fundamental failures of the electoral system in this country. That you have that there's not a realistic alternative on the presidential level to those which support such a horrendous policy that is opposed by the vast majority of the American public. And similarly to Congress. We are seeing some important dissident voices on Capitol Hill, but they're very much a minority. All not just virtually every Republican, but virtually the entire Democratic leadership is supporting Netanyahu and Biden on this. And again, not representative of the again the vast majority of Democrats. I've rarely seen such a huge disassociation between public opinion and the leadership of the Democratic Party. Among 18 to 30-year-olds, 72% oppose Biden's policies on Gaza. That is more than we saw in that age group in opposition of Bush's policy in Iraq, Reagan's policy in Central America, and Nixon's policies on Vietnam. This is an unprecedented level of dissent. And yet, Biden seems to be coasting to, re-nomination. And we're here. I mean, I think of the analogy, and some of us are old enough to remember being around in January 1968, and Johnson was running for re-election. And I think we don't have a Eugene McCarthy. We don't have a Robert Kennedy, or at least a sane one. And I think it just really underscores, what many of us have had issues with about the fundamental failures of the electoral system in this country. That you have that there's not a realistic alternative on the presidential level to those which support such a horrendous policy that is opposed by the vast majority of the American public. And similarly to Congress. We are seeing some important dissident voices on Capitol Hill, but they're very much a minority. All not just virtually every Republican, but virtually the entire Democratic leadership is supporting Netanyahu and Biden on this. And again, not representative of the again the vast majority of Democrats. I've rarely seen such a huge disassociation between public opinion and the leadership of the Democratic Party. I've seen a lot of them, but this is one of the worst. The United States is even more isolated in the international community. Biden has used the veto power 3 times in the past 3 months, and severely threatened it other times to leave the Security Council virtually without ability to act. And we have, and in the UN General Assembly, we're one of only 10 dissenting votes calling for a ceasefire, the others being Israel, several Pacific Island states that are totally dependent on the U.S. economically, and a few right-wing populist governments like Hungary. I mean, that was it. So we're very much isolated in the international community, again, even more so than we were on Iraq, on Central America, or Vietnam. Well, not surprisingly, we are seeing unprecedented resistance on college campuses and elsewhere. Again, this is very heartening. We're also seeing nearly unprecedented level, at least over the past 60 years, in terms of political repression. I mean, I was in grad school during the BDS campaign on South Africa, and I was arrested multiple times. Charges were always dropped. Whereas nowadays people doing sit-ins are facing very serious criminal offenses. Similarly, we didn't have our films or our speakers canceled and censored by administrations. We're seeing this, across the country, and we're not talking about hardcore pro-Hamas types. We're talking about Jewish progressives. We're talking about pacifists. We're talking about liberals who just support international law, and they're canceling their talks as well. And we had Central America solidarity groups, South Africa solidarity groups. We weren't banned, but they're being banned now, even Jewish-led groups. I mean, you have to really go back to the mid-'60s to see this kind of repression. Also, the anti-BDS laws that we're seeing. I mean, just for example, that you have to sign a statement that you won't boycott Israel if you want to get if a newspaper wants to accept an ad from a community college or other state institution, if you're going to be a guest speaker somewhere. I mean, I can't, for example, if the University of Arkansas wanted me to come in, I have to sign something that says I don't boycott Israel in order to get my airfare covered, much less an honorarium. As a way of keeping, left speakers out of their college campuses, basically. And the Supreme Court has upheld that law. And here's the kicker. They define Israel as Israel or territories controlled by Israel. So even if you don't endorse the BDS call, you simply don't want to buy from, you want to boycott Caterpillar or Motorola or Hewlett Packard, those that are directly supporting the occupation, that counts as total BDS. And several states have divested from their stock from Unilever because Ben & Jerry's, which is owned by Unilever, even though they sell their ice cream in Israel, make their ice cream in Israel, they refuse to do so in the settlement. So therefore, they're punished for doing so. And again, we didn't see this around the South Africa divestment campaign. And when I think about this repression of anti-war voices, it concerns me. Is this a trial run for war with Iran or war with Venezuela? I mean, I think they're really checking to see how far they can go. And this is why it's particularly important. We need to fight back. Now, they can get away with this because of these charges of anti-Semitism. And I don't need to tell this audience about how anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. But it makes it more difficult, the fact that Israel is the only Jewish state. When I think of times that I've had talks canceled at the last moment, or saying, oh, you can speak, but you have to be followed by a pro-Israel speaker afterwards, the people making those decisions were not right-wing Zionists. These were liberals who heard from their Jewish friends that I was anti-Semitic or whatever. And they were saying, and there's a sense that, and you know how liberals, leftists, for good reason, if we hear somebody saying something's racist, or a black person saying something's racist, or a woman saying something sexist, we give them, we assume that, well, they should know. Who am I as a white male to say to a black person, that's not, you're wrong, that's racist, or a woman say you're wrong, that it's sexist. And I think a lot of liberals see that with Jews who say that Israel, that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. I mean, I don't think it's a big part of money. I don't think money is really, a few cases maybe, but I really don't think it's the financial thing as much as I think people really sincerely believe these good middle-aged liberals, who really do, who don't realize that the weaponization of anti-Semitism to justify a highly repressive right-wing government. Now, when fighting back against these McCarthyist attacks, let's not fall into a crying wolf phenomenon of not taking seriously when anti-Semitism does raise its ugly head within our ranks. It does happen. Not nearly the frequency that people claim, but let's not pretend it isn't there. And I'll just give an example. Obviously, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, but using the term Zionism in the same way anti-Semites have used Jews, such as alleging the Zionists control the banks, the Zionists control the government, the Zionists control the media. And again, that's just rehashing the old anti-Semitic canards. You'll find far more Episcopalians and Presbyterians, who are a smaller percentage of the population than Jews, far more disproportionately represented in the ranks of government, the media, the banks, their finance, than you'll find Jews. Similarly, it's not anti-Semitic to call out the bullying of AIPAC and other powerful Zionist groups. But let's not pretend U.S. policy would be fundamentally different if they weren't around. I mean, if it weren't for the lobby, we'd probably have more Democratic allies in Congress. It'd probably be less censorship. It would be more balanced media coverage. It would be helpful in our struggle. But would there be a fundamental change in our policy? I mean, does anybody think the U.S. government would be promoting a policy towards Israel and Palestine consistent with human rights and international law, nonviolent conflict resolution? And when have we had that policy anywhere else in the world? I mean, the U.S. supports the Moroccan occupation of Western Sahara. We support Indonesia's occupation of East Timor. We supported apartheid South Africa's occupation of Namibia. It wasn't a domestic lobby that made us do this. In recent years, we supported Saudi Arabia slaughtering tens of thousands of Yemenis and their bombing, with the U.S. Air Force refueling the fighter planes and helping with target selections. Okay, Gaza is not unique. And we could go to the death squads in Central America. We could think of, we could go down the list. That let's not scapegoat Jews or Zionists and ignore the fact that U.S. imperialism is the root of the problem here. It's U.S. imperialism and militarism and the crisis of late capitalism. These are the issues. This is what's underlying. And the way anti-Semitism actually often works is they'll find a subset of the ruling class and target that instead of the overall system. I've actually talked to Arab foreign ministers and deputy foreign ministers, and I say, why are you still friendly? A half dozen of them. Literally, a half dozen Arab foreign ministers and deputy foreign ministers I've spoken with personally. And I've said, why are you still so friendly with the U.S. given what we're doing with the Palestinians? And each and every one of them said, oh, your ambassador, your State Department guy said, the Jews really run U.S. foreign policy, and it's not your fault. The classic anti-Semitic scapegoating. Let's not allow that to happen. So again, I protested when AIPAC is met in San Francisco. I'm not ignorant about their clout and how they made things more difficult. But again, this is about imperialism. This is not about some powerful minority group or whatever. And we really need to recognize that. How's my time? Okay, let me talk briefly about Hamas. I was the first person to write an article about the rise of extremist Islamist currents, reactionary Islamic currents within the Palestinian movement. This was back in 1982. I was 25 years old after my first visit to Gaza. And I saw how the Israelis, and to an extent the United States, was actually encouraging this as a counter to the largely secular nationalist PLO, which includes some leftist elements in its ranks. And Hamas had a support of less than 15% of the Palestinian population at the time of the Oslo Accords. And they were saying, hey, look, you guys are suckers to trust the United States and Israel will give a viable two-state solution here. And the settlements continuing to expand, the U.S. continues to support Israel no matter what. The Palestine Authority essentially becoming jailers in their own prison. More and more people supported Hamas until the 2006 parliamentary elections. They got 44% of the vote. They end up being able to seize a majority of the parliament, though the more moderate Palestinians were still in the executive branch. The Bush administration freaked out. They pushed the Fatah to stage a coup against Hamas. Hamas got wind of it. They had a 3-day civil war. When the smoke cleared, Fatah had control of the cities in the West Bank, and Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip. There's several articles I've written some about. Vanity Fair had a very detailed article about this whole debacle. In other words, if the U.S. had not intervened, Hamas would have never taken control of Gaza, and this whole tragedy would not have been happening, seen with the previous wars. And to mention something about their rule, they really are pretty reactionary. They've suppressed leftist groups, they've suppressed the teachers' unions, they've suppressed other things. I want to just say one thing really briefly that I think we need to consider when talking about Hamas. They aren't just a violent manifestation of a national liberation movement. They really are a pretty nasty, reactionary Islamist group, which is in many ways hijacked the struggle. And those we should be steadfast in supporting the Palestinian struggle. Let's not make apologies for them. And this is a big dilemma I think a lot of us on the left are taking right now. When most of us were coming to age, the leading challenges to Western imperialism were progressive. Some of them were a little more too militaristic and authoritarian for some of us, but by and large, there's no question who the good guys were in Vietnam and Central America and Southern Africa and elsewhere. Nowadays, a large portion of the anti-imperialists is being led by reactionaries, Salafist Islamist groups, like Hamas, not to mention Al-Qaeda and ISIS, or the Iranian regime and its allies, or Putin, or you can go down the list. And we need to be cognizant of that. This does not mean we should challenge imperialism any less. It does not mean we shouldn't point out how U.S. policies have given rise to these reactionary forces. But let's not deny the nature of some of these groups here. And so finally, I want to give some hope. We have, it looks like a lot of us have been around enough to see victories on Vietnam, Central America, even East Timor, South Africa, elsewhere, that we can win this one too, I believe. And the big hope I have is in young people. I have never, I'm a political scientist, I have not seen any, except for the possible exception of LGBTQ issues, I have never seen an issue where age and political attitude parallel people as dramatically as I do Israel and Palestine. It's quite remarkable. I've been teaching Middle East politics, for 35 years, and oh my God, what a difference. I had to bend over backwards to make sure people understood the Palestinian narrative, when I came in. If anything, it's the other way around nowadays. And there's several reasons for this. One is the young people today are much more diverse, many more people of color, and they recognize, and including a larger population of Muslims and Arab Americans. But they identify very much with the Palestinian struggle. Some in our generation, even some people on the left, saw Zionism as a national liberation movement for an oppressed people. Yes, it did nasty things, but nationalist revolution comes before socialist revolution. So, people were willing to give Zionism some slack. This younger generation of leftists, no, they see it as colonial settlerism. And with the idea, and getting the consciousness people have of indigenous rights, and again, it fits in very much with that. And a lot of us, our generations, thought the kibbutzim were really cool. These wonderful, idealistic socialist cooperatives, and et cetera. Younger people saying, "Yeah, but it's on stolen land," And you go down the list. This is the attitudes are very, very different now. The guilt from the horror of the Holocaust is a couple generations back now. The more overt forms of anti-Semitism, which are still pretty rampant in the 40s, 50s, 60s, are less visible now. And so I think there's a I think we now, we have a whole different approach to the conflict, as well as a skepticism about war and intervention that emerged from the tragedy in Iraq and Afghanistan. So here's the hope that these young people are going to be in power someday. And I think we'll see a very, very, very different policy. The question is, how long is it going to be, and how many people are going to die first? And that's why we need to keep on mobilizing, keep on organizing, and realizing that we will win. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Stephen Zunes. All right. Okay, our next speaker is David Spero from JVP Action. And he grew up as a Reform Jew and has been a lifelong peace and environmental activist. He joined Jewish Voice for Peace in 2014 during a previous assault on Gaza and has been active in JVP ever since. He lives in San Francisco and writes extensively about economics, ecology, and peace. And for 2 months, he's been writing about the Gaza catastrophe on medium.com and his Substack, Make Earth Sacred Again. He was heavily involved in getting the California Green Party on the ballot back in the early 90s and edited the newspaper Green Consensus for a couple of years. So welcome, David Spero.
Things have changed. This has been a hard talk to even prepare for. I've been pretty much obsessed with this issue for 3 months. I have friends in Gaza and in the West Bank and in Israel. And people are all traumatized. And I get stories from them. I get reports. I was working on the talk last night, and I got a Facebook Messenger call from in southern Gaza. And it was from a friend of mine named Sama, who I've set up a GoFundMe for about 5 years ago, maybe 5-6 years ago. And so we've been in touch ever since. But since the attack started, she hasn't been able to get online very much. People's internet connection and their power and their devices keeps running out. So she called me like midnight last night to say that the little room that she and her 3 children and her husband had been living in had been smashed up, and they are now living in a tent. They were cold and they were hungry, and could I send her some money? There's money from the GoFundMe. And so I did. Hopefully she'll get it. I mean, it doesn't work as well as it used to. But she sent this message, and I wanted to read it to you. I don't usually do this in a talk, but I may not be able to. Okay, after 84 days of the war on the Gaza Strip, the war of displacement of the population of Gaza and the theft of their homes and shops by the occupation army, we are still alive, but without food, without water, without shelter. She said, we moved from one house to another, from one school to another, from street to street, trying to preserve our children's lives. They are suffering all the woes of this war. The world is preparing, this was a week ago, the world is preparing for New Year's celebrations, and we await our turn in death. More than 30,000 have been killed so far, and 70% of Gaza's families have lost their homes. And then she asks, because it's GoFundMe, she asks for donations to buy them food, drink, and blankets, and medicine, and repair what can be repaired. I pray that the war will stop soon. I only get internet for a few minutes every couple of days, so I don't know when the next time I'll be able to open it again. Please excuse me for disturbing you. So I get messages like that. It's hard to, it's very painful. It's really, it's almost traumatic, really, reading these messages from people who are just young mothers, who have done nothing to anybody, and they're suffering like this, and very likely are going to die if we can't stop this. But I'm going to try to tell you that I've been, like I said, I've been obsessed with this. I've been writing about it for the last 9 weeks or more on Medium and on Substack, and I hope some of you will look at some of those. And I'm going to talk about some of the stories that I've written. But I'll tell you a little bit about, I came up in Western New York, Reformed Jewish, left liberal parents who liked Israel, but they weren't gung-ho about it. They never talked about moving there, which a lot of their friends actually did move there, but they never talked about it. But as kids, we collected money to plant trees in Israel. And we didn't realize those trees were being planted to disguise Palestinian villages that had been raised. We just thought we were planting trees. We learned about the kibbutzim that, like Dr. Zunes mentioned, and never learned about where the land came from. And we never heard a thing about Palestinians. I don't remember hearing the word Palestine or Palestinians as a kid. It was always, they talk about Arabs, and the Arabs are these bad people who want to kill the Jews. And that's all we heard. But as a teenager, Vietnam came, and I started to become more politically involved in things like peace and ecology and health. It was nice to be back here. I feel like it's coming back. I used to be here a lot. The Green Party office was right across the street and about a block down when we were organizing to get the party on the ballot. So I was there, but not for a long time. And then in 2014, invasion of Gaza and bombing of Gaza, I got involved in Jewish Voice for Peace. I said, I had known about this issue for 40 years, but not gotten particularly involved in it. Okay. And then the war in Gaza at that time, which killed 2,000 people, not as bad as what's going on now, but it was a big thing. So I got involved with JVP and have been doing that ever since. And I made friends in Gaza because of that. You know, I was tutoring people. I tutored some young Palestinian writers to write in English so that they could tell their stories to English reading audiences. And then people started finding me on Facebook. And after I set up this GoFundMe for one of them, a bunch of people came. So I've been involved in this issue, and I've been doing everything that JVP does, you know, going to demonstrations, supporting ceasefire resolutions, wearing ceasefire shirts, things like that, ever since. And I've been writing about it. And I'm just going to briefly summarize a couple of the articles that I've written, because that might be other ways of looking at it. And the one was called "This is Another American Genocide," which Stephen Zunes was kind of on about that. But this is not just Israel's war. This is the U.S. and Israel. I mean, Israel would not be doing it if the U.S. didn't okay it, and they couldn't. I mean, when United States officials like Blinken and is that his name? Blinken and Biden say, you know, we are cautioning Israel to use caution and everything, while sending them these massive bombs. I mean, it's insane. It's gaslighting. I mean, how can you expect us to take this seriously? You know, I mean, you're bombs to blow people up, but don't, you know, be careful how you use them. So we think in U.S. and Israel are joined at the hip by the military-industrial complex, and that's important to realize. That is, Israel's wars and the wars that Israel kind of promotes for the United States are trillion-dollar income generators for the military corporations. And the neoconservatives, who were the people that, you know, kind of got the U.S. on this full-blown dominate the world, unipolar world policy, are a mix of military-industrial corporation executives and Zionist Jews from the University of Chicago. And now it's spread. Now neoconservatives are everywhere in the U.S. government. But that connection has never ended, never stopped. What was the senator's name? Scoop Jackson from Washington, who was called the senator from Boeing, who is not Jewish. And he was an original major sponsor of the neoconservatives. So that's going on. And that's why JVP, we don't take a position on Israeli politics. We're not for one state solution or a two-state solution or any number of states. We don't think that's our really business to decide, but we are all about stopping U.S. military aid to Israel and stopping political support too. But so that's one thing. This is America's war. Another article was about why Israel promotes anti-Semitism. And it's true that, and we probably all know the way they use accusations of anti-Semitism to shut down any criticism of Israel or any support for Palestine or anybody, you know, for ceasefire is anti-Semitic in their way. I mean, but it's more than that, because they want the people who founded Israel would like it when things are very uncomfortable for Jews out in the other world, because that will drive people to either move to Israel or donate to Israel or politically support Israel. And they set themselves up. We are the only safe place for Jews in the world, which Biden said just 2 weeks ago, that if there was no Israel, there would not be a Jew who was safe in the world. And this is like the chief executive of the most powerful country in the world saying he can't protect us. I mean, so that sort of thing is going on, and it drives politics way to the right. I mean, with these accusations of anti-Semitism, they got rid of Jeremy Corbyn, they got rid of Cynthia McKinney, and they've gotten rid of others or suppressed others. Yeah, Dennis Kucinich, yeah. And this is not good for anybody who believes in labor or in any progressive cause or in peace. Lately, we at JVP, we've been confronting the Jewish Community Relations Council, which is a major, actually liberal organization. On every other issue in the world, they're pretty progressive. But on this issue, they've been showing up at city council meetings and other meetings to say that when people are considering a ceasefire resolution, like is going to happen in San Francisco Monday, that they're being anti-Semitic, or that people chanting Free Palestine are saying kill the Jews. You know, and that kind of thing is just all over the place now. It's like this relentless gaslighting that they do and lying. And I was watching Glenn Greenwald on the way over here, and he was talking about how he keeps hearing how there are these crowds of students rampaging around campuses saying kill the Jews or gas the Jews. And he will say, give me one example, you know, one actual quote or one video. Nobody can do it, but they still believe it. And when I write an article, I get a lot of criticism, obviously, from pro-Israel readers, and saying things like, well, what about Hamas, you know, what about Hamas cutting off those babies' heads? You know, or what about this mass rape? And all these charges that they throw out there. And Israel had a long reliance on false flags and made up stories, and they're still doing it. I don't know if I didn't mention that it's important to remember, and we know, I'm sure, but not everybody knows, that this is not a religious fight. This is not Jews versus Muslims. This is about money. This is about land. It's about oil. It's about geopolitical power. It's not about the religion, which actually those two religions are really similar, you know, Judaism and Islam. So that was my key point. That basically, that another thing to remember is that Jews are a traumatized people. I mean, we've been repeatedly attacked and victimized and uprooted. So it's where people are very easily provoked by fear-based propaganda. And some of them act out that trauma in violent ways. And in general, I think that Jews who move to Israel tend to be more traumatized than Jews are in America, because they're in a traumatic situation. I mean, they're committing a lot of the violence, but there's violence going both ways. And even traumatizing others is traumatic for you, which has been shown by many studies of police officers. They're all traumatized by what they do. So that's happening. And the one other article that I wrote about that theme, and that got me in the most trouble, probably will get me in trouble here. It was called Zionism, How Zionists Became the New Nazis, which is a pretty strong statement. I realized it was a really strong statement, but I was wondering, where does this ideology come from? And so I read Mein Kampf, and the parallels are really striking. You know, this combination of feeling victimized and feeling threatened and feeling superior at the same time. And it leads to being militaristic. You know, we have to be violent, we have to fight, we have to kill. And the endless land grabs, which Hitler was all about, we need more land, and demonizing an outside force, outside group. And this process is not limited to Israel or Germany. It was, you know, you can say the same thing about the United States. I mean, we are a settler colony, and pretty much all settler colonies go through that process, you know, turning more and more violently against those they dispossess. The original Zionists that came to Israel were not planning to kill all the Arabs. That was not their plan. They wanted to drive some away and take over the land, and then everybody would get along more or less. But it didn't work, because people aren't going to just let you take their land and fade away. And so you dehumanize them, and they're dehumanizing the Palestinians the same way Hitler dehumanized the Jews. I mean, it's not like in the United States where basically we were able to push all the native people so far out of the way that we don't really have to worry about them anymore, you know. But they can't do that there. So over the years, Israel's moved more and more to open fascism, especially because of Americans moving there and Russians, people who became settlers and were actively involved in physically dispossessing people. So the much closer contact, not like the contact that we have with Native Americans. It's like right up in your face contact that they're having. And those people have now moved into government, and the government has gone way far to the right. And they lie about everything. And the last thing I really want to say is that people believe those lies, and it makes it really hard to have a conversation. People will accuse you, if you have more sources than they do, the sources mainly being the New York Times and the IDF. If you have other sources, they say, well, you're just ignorant. You don't know what's really going on. To talk about JVP, I really need to talk about Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace started in Oakland. Did you know that? It's like so many other good things in America. It started in Oakland in, I think, 92. And it's now a national organization. I think it's still the fastest growing Jewish organization in America. We've been very busy. It's not the most left among Jewish groups, among Jewish anti-Zionist groups. We're not the most left group. There are many others. But we are promoting ceasefire resolutions in city councils. We're lobbying people. We're going to demonstrations. Shut down Grand Central Station. Shut down the state building in Sacramento and the Alameda County Council in Oakland. Was that? Yeah. It's a 501c3, JVP is, so we can't endorse political candidates, but there is this C4 JVP Action, which I'm a member of, which can endorse candidates. So we might support Laura or, somebody from Peace and Freedom or Greens next time. We're supporting Rashida Tlaib in Michigan. And that's it. I hope everybody will get involved. I know you're all involved. But this, to me, is the biggest issue that's going on, biggest issue of our lifetime.
Thank you, David. I guess I have had similar experiences in my youth and development, so it was very meaningful to me. Okay, so now time for Zach Weinstein. He's one of the co-chairs of the East Bay Democratic Socialists of America's Labor Committee. In his day job, he's a union organizer at a national healthcare union and a member of the Communications Workers of America. He's also a member of Bay Area Labor for Palestine, and that's a grassroots group of local union members organizing to push their unions to stand in solidarity with Palestine. So there you go, Zach.
Okay, great. Nice to see everyone out here. I saw a lot of you earlier at the Alameda and El Cerrito ceasefire rally. So what I wanted to talk to folks a little bit about is efforts within the labor movement to stand in solidarity with Palestine. Really quickly, don't want to assume that everybody here is familiar with the Democratic Socialists of America. It's the largest socialist organization in the United States since the 1930s. And here in the East Bay, we have about 2,000 dues-paying members. It's a Democratic member-run organization. And our labor committee, which I'm one of the co-chairs of, is tasked with carrying out all the activities of our local chapter relating to the labor movement, which for socialists, as a lot of you know, is a lot of what we're interested in doing. And more on that later. But I wanted to explain a little bit about what Bay Area Labor for Palestine is, how it came to be, what we've been up to, and what is next. So Bay Area Labor for Palestine, as Marcia mentioned, is really a grassroots new formation that came about after it became clear that Israel was about to launch a genocidal campaign in Gaza. A number of us wanted to organize in our unions to get them to take positions in solidarity with Palestine. So the first thing that we said we wanted to do was to plan some kind of labor rally for Palestine, and we drafted a template resolution for union militants to try to pass through their unions. The template had 3 demands. First was an end to U.S. military aid to Israel. The next was an immediate ceasefire. And the third was to end Israeli apartheid and the occupation and siege of Palestinian land. And these demands were basically written to be coming from the union and directed at elected officials who they had supported or endorsed. So we were trying to put pressure on, U.S. elected officials. And it also included a call for the union to get on board for a labor rally in support of Palestine. So we basically just planted that flag sometime in earlier mid-October and started meeting weekly. And dozens of people started coming to our meetings, most of whom were union members, some of whom were from groups like Palestinian Youth Movement or Arab Resource and Organizing Center, or AROC for short. And in mid-December, we did come together and hold a Bay Area Labor for Palestine rally. I'm sure some of you were there. About 2,000 people came out. It was endorsed by over a dozen union locals. As far as we know, it was the first action of its kind in solidarity with Palestine from the labor movement. And it was the most unions, as far as anyone involved knows, who would ever come out in support of not just a ceasefire, but the rally explicitly had those three demands: end the occupation, U.S. military aid, permanent ceasefire. So we didn't just organize unions around kind of the minimum demand, but kind of challenged folks to do more. And we were honestly surprised at how many unions were willing to put their name on that, which really, I think, underscores how important it is to, push for, you can't always get everything you want, but to not just stick to the minimum and see how people respond. And so we've played now that we've been in existence for a little under 3 months, we've played a direct or indirect role in a number of unions, either adopting a version of our resolution or endorsing our rally that effectively made the same demands. Those unions include SEIU United Service Workers West, SEIU 10-1, IFPTE Local 21, ILWU Local 10, Trader Joe's United Local 4, the IWW Bay Area Chapter, the Oakland Teachers Union, the San Francisco Teachers Union, AFSCME Local 3299, and Unite Here Local 2. And there's other unions like the grad workers at UAW 2865 and UAW 5810 that had already come out in support of BDS and Palestinian liberation previously, but we were able to get their Berkeley chapters to endorse our rally. And that rally was also endorsed by a number of groups, including PYM, AROC, and other formal and informal organizations also came out for the rally. We were really excited to be working with them. And so, what did we saw before we to get these units on board with these demands? And so I'm going to start with a more abstract and move to answer that question. So to start with the abstract, I think it's useful to think about, this is from Gramsci, I'm cribbing the concept of maneuver versus a war of position. Is a direct revolution against the ruling class. You can also think of it as a time when there's outright confrontation with the class on a mass level, and compare that to a war of position, which is a time to build strength, gather forces, and engage in political agitation within your kind of existing organizations and institutions. So effectively, right, there's moments where you're building your strength with what you have and kind of consolidating. And then there's moments where you're confronting the ruling class directly and openly. And I think it's really useful to know when you're more in one or the other. Of course, these abstractions are never quite so neat in real life, but it's helpful to know, am I in a moment where we need to be challenging the ruling class directly, or do we need to be building our organizational power and capacity for the next open confrontation? And so going back a few years, I joined East Bay DSA in the fall of 2020. This was at the tail end of a very exciting labor solidarity campaign with the workers on strike at Alameda Health System. Folks may remember this, but the nurses shut down the healthcare system, not just for a number of pandemic health and safety demands, but also demanding that their bosses be fired. And they were successful in getting the board of trustees of the health system fired and winning a lot of their other demands. And so that was a really exciting time to get involved in a socialist organization. But once that strike was over, there wasn't another galvanizing public struggle in labor for us to latch onto on the horizon. That's not an issue that was unique to East Bay DSA or the Bay Area, right? Like in the fall of 2020, that was a pretty rough time to be on the left. Not only was the pandemic itself kind of inherently demobilizing because, right, it atomized us. We needed to stay home or, stay away from big crowds as much as we could. And that was made even worse by the fact that, in the summer, we saw the ruling class successfully do a combination of co-optation, repression, and beating back of the uprisings for racial justice that happened all over the country. And immediately before that was the kind of deflating end of the Bernie Sanders primary challenge in 2020. So there was kind of this series of really direct confrontations with the ruling class that I'm not criticizing anyone for not overthrowing capitalism in the fall of 2020, but it's just the reality that people had really hit their all that year on a variety of fronts and kind of back. And so heading into 2021 in East Bay DSA, what a lot of us did was kind of regroup and do what I would kind of characterize as preparing for a war of position, right? We were getting ready to regroup because we had kind of exhausted our direct challenge to the ruling class. So we kind of entered into a phase of regrouping. On the labor front, there are a few things we did. We started a jobs program, which was encouraging East Bay DSA members and other socialists and like-minded people to get jobs at strategic workplaces, both union and non-union. So Amazon, the Oakland Unified School District, and UPS were three of the main places we tried to get our members to get jobs. We launched a local emergency workplace organizing committee, or EWOC, if folks are familiar with that group. That organization will help people organize non-union workplaces or win, other demands besides unionizing your workplace, like different issue campaigns, health and safety in your workplace. And the last thing we did was make sure that we were educating our members on the centrality of labor to winning socialism in the United States, which, to just state it briefly, is that one of our biggest points of leverage against the ruling class in capitalism is our ability to interrupt the production process, right? Our ability to withhold our labor. And so we didn't, only turn inwards. We still kept an eye out for local labor struggles, which is why in 2022, we also supported the UAW strike at UC Berkeley. And actually dozens of our members are UAW members at Berkeley. So there was a lot of cross-pollination there. And then in 2023, when the Oakland teachers went on strike, we have about 36 members of DSA who are Oakland teachers. So we were able to coordinate with them. We raised about $50,000 for teachers, students, and families who needed food while the strike was ongoing, because a lot of families and kids rely on schools as a source of food. And so we tried to limit the extent to which that was a problem for families. But in short, over the last couple of years, we've been building our relationships with and presence within unions so that at the next moment of crisis, we could be in a position to making meaningful intervention in the local labor movement. And so in addition to the dozens of teachers in Oakland I mentioned, we also have more than a half dozen East Bay DSA members who are UPS workers. We have folks who are at Amazon warehouses around the Bay Area trying to figure out how to organize. And I would argue that now the Palestinian liberation struggle has launched us into a new moment of rupture, a new direct confrontation with the ruling class. And thanks to our organizing over the last few years, we've been in a position to make a meaningful intervention in solidarity with the Palestinian liberation struggle. And so that's why we launched Bay Area Labor for Palestine. Is we have all of these members who are in unions around the Bay Area, and what people need is tools to move their unions in a positive direction. Some unions, they might already support a ceasefire. So now that means how do we get them to support BDS? or if you can't even get your union to vote on a ceasefire resolution, how do you start building a reform caucus that's not going to only take on this issue of Palestinian liberation, but also going to make your union more democratic so that you can intervene in a wide variety of struggles and really make your union a vehicle for class struggle, right? So that's what we're trying to do in the Bay Area with our DSA chapter and with labor. And I think it'll be really exciting to see what happens next. We were really focused on this rally in December. We're now kind of regrouping within Bay Area Labor for Palestine and hoping to hold some kind of public facing conference maybe later this winter to talk about what the various next steps are for different unions, again, whether that's getting a more pro-Palestinian union like the UAW, which now their international has called for a ceasefire. So how do you move BDS or stronger demands? And I think one thing that'll be really important is that we figure out how to keep Bay Area Labor for Palestine a space that union members and people who maybe don't necessarily think of themselves as socialists or activists, but do care about this issue and care about their unions, keep it a space that is, hospitable to those folks and that they want to keep coming back to. And I think the last thing I'll say is we need to figure out how to push local labor councils to stand up to the AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO has actually been actively repressing labor councils from putting out resolutions in support of ceasefire. And so we're going to need to pressure, the Alameda and Contra Costa labor councils to do the right thing on this, because they are going to face blowback from the AFL-CIO for doing so. Oh, yeah. And then, there's going to be a bunch of actions, but there will be, and I'm sure we'll maybe end with announcements about those, but there will be a block the boat action on the 13th, which I'm sure a lot of our members will be at. So I think with that, hopefully I didn't go over time, and I'll hand it back.
Okay, well, thanks, Zach. So actually, I want to make this announcement. So we had another speaker on some of the flyers. We had hoped to have a speaker from AROC, Arab Resource and Organizing Center, and Lujain Al-Saleh was supposed to be speaking, and she was unable, and she apologizes and wants us to know that she supports this event. So just so that we're not being boycotted by AROC. All right, so we're going to hear from Stan Woods and another person who's organizing another. Wes is going to speak also about something he's organizing in Contra Costa County, right?
Everybody here is either a registrant or at least friendly to Peace and Freedom Party and the Green Party. Short summary, we have a combined total of over 200,000 registrants in California. I think that we're going to be on 2024 a very interesting year. A lot of people who were constantly holding their noses and voting for Democrats are going to have a hard time this year, especially if they have any sympathy whatsoever for the thousands and thousands slaughtered in the Gaza Strip. So one of the things to make this work, and not only on local races, I don't know if you heard, the American Israel Political Action Committee is targeting Democrats that are even thinking about supporting the ceasefire. They plan to spend millions to defeat any even halfway sounding progressive candidates. We're going to be much more modest. We have no PACs supporting us, but we do have to pass the hat. We do get some contributions. So I'm going to pass the hat to contribute to the campaigns, the Peace and Freedom Party and the Greens Party. And by the way, there were separate parties. Last year, we ran a joint left unity slate. Some of our candidates got several 100,000 votes, which does count. And one thing I should point out, one thing the Democrats don't do is that they scare easily. That is, for example, once we had a candidate run in Clovis next to Fresno in Fresno County. That's a county with 80% registered Republican. The Democrats didn't even run a candidate for city council. Our candidate didn't win, but he came in next to last, and he won 13% of the vote. And the people we campaigned said the Democrats didn't even talk to them. Well, Peace and Freedom Party and the Greens hope to break that dynamic, and we want to talk to everybody. from Shasta County to San Diego. So if you like to contribute, please do. I want to bring up as I passed ahead, Wes Nicholson is going to talk about an upcoming mobilization at the Concord City Council. And then if you'd like to talk, Robbie Donahoe from the Electricians Union would like to talk about projected Ireland Palestine solidarity contingent at the St. Patrick's Day parade coming up on March 17th.
Yeah, so there's a few of us out in Concord that feel that we want to exercise our political right and also obligation, I think, in this case, to see about sending the message locally to move on up the line. Now, whether it'll have an effect or not, I don't know, but I think it's still important to do. So if anybody wants to find out more about what's going on in Concord of trying to get the city council to do a resolution, just like Stan, I think, was in on getting, was it Richmond to do it, and other cities around are doing this. It's a way to, not that it's gonna change Biden's mind necessarily, but it's a way to combat feeling impotent about this thing. You know, we gotta do something. Biden, and I call him Genocide Joe now, but him and his gang, you know, it's not going to fly. It just doesn't fly when you kill so many children and people don't like it. So anyway, if you're interested in finding out about what's going to conquer or becoming part of it, even just see me after something. We'll change the numbers and we'll let you know. It's just starting to formulate, but we don't like to sit still in Concord. What? I keep my own body just right next to me. Yeah. Oh, the Concord City Council. Thank you.
Make an announcement? Yeah, I'm making an announcement. So I'm with Code Pink, and Code Pink has not rested since this started. I mean, I'm talking about October 7, but, you know, we've been pro-Palestinian for, decades. So we shut the Israeli consulate about 10 days ago. We shut a Lockheed Martin office in San Francisco also. We've been going to Pelosi's house. We're going up there again. This is the announcement. On the day after the port shut down, we're going to Pelosi's house in the morning. She is a disaster for the country, and we have to be really clear. San Francisco deserves to be represented in Congress, and she only represents Lockheed Martin and the oligarchy. So Pelosi needs to be called out. We've tried to be polite. Being polite didn't work. The other part of this whole disaster, Lockheed Martin, they're designing weapons in space in Palo Alto near the Stanford campus. The Stanford students want to go out with us and shut down that Lockheed Martin. And so we're going to do that before the end of the month. And codepink.org is where you see our calendar. We're women-led. I'd like to see more women speaking sometime.
Okay, and Stan, you said Robbie needed to make an announcement, or is he? I don't see him. There you are. Okay, and then after that, I'm going to take a stack.
I actually hadn't planned on making an announcement. We just started talking about doing this because we never imagined that we would be still talking about planning for future actions by this point in this. But as St. Patrick's Day approaches, we were talking about doing some solidarity, Irish and Palestinian solidarity actions, culminating in something at the St. Patrick's Day parade and the festivities the next day. So if you're interested in any of that, you can come talk to me and we'll get contacts.
Great.
Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention that in addition to the books I have for sale, if you want to be my email list, please please write your email address clearly. About once a month or so, I'll send out my latest articles. I've been focusing almost exclusively on Israel, Palestine in recent months, and I can send you some of my back articles as well. So feel free to sign as you leave or beforehand on the desk where you table where you first came in.
Okay. So first I want to know how many, raise your hand if you're going to want to speak, because I need to decide 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think we can try to do 2 to 3 minutes, depending on which we want. Can you guys do 2? Yeah. Okay, because we need to give the panelists time to answer. What we're going to do is have 3 at a time, and you guys need to take notes so that if you need to answer, and we're going to limit the answers also to 2 or 3 minutes. So James, I think you're first.
Okay, this actually is a question for the professor, and I recently read a book by Edward Said called Orientalism, and which gives us some clarity on this project of demonizing the Middle East and Far East, for centuries. And, but I thought, okay, it's applying I could see some applications there. But yesterday I read an article in Foreign Affairs, which is the Council on Foreign Relations magazine, by an Orientalist, again, depicting the whole situation and not in the terms of the people who are actually feeling all the problems, but how is this going to affect the West? This is an important, strategic place for us. And so I kind of wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah. You'll have to remember the questions because otherwise we never get to everybody. So Norma, come on over here.
The main issue I'm talking to you about, I can't hear. The sound reverberates against wrong in my hearing. I'm breaking down one place at a time. My eye went, my ear went. So I'm 88, which means I was born in 35, which means I was born a communist Jew. And those things went together. They were not different from each other. We did sing songs about making Eretz Israel, making Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. Huh? What? And all kinds of, adherence to justice and so forth. In the meantime, in the recent past couple of weeks, I have written a note that Paul LaRuti answered. How many people have read Paul LaRuti's notes? Okay, well, he's a great devotee of support about what's been made into the Middle East by imperialism. I asked him why the group of Jews that was settled onto what's called Israel didn't just move in. They've got all kinds of groups of people, immigrants, moving in here in the United States, and they put them places. And they come and they live together. Now, so far, as bad as it is, as good as it is, that's how the establishment or the movement of the immigrants goes on. And Paul LaRuti wrote back, and guess what he said? He said that group of Jews refused to move in with the people who were already resident for whatever thousands of years. Jews and Arabs had been living together for way long. Not, I won't say millennia, but way long. So I want you to know that because I wanted you to know where I came from. I emigrated to Israel. My Irish Catholic husband and he got so pissed at the school he was attending and the behavior in the class. He said, let's go to Israel, because he knew that I had attachments and he supported and so forth. So we went to Israel to emigrate. That took 9.5 months before his impatience with being there got us moved back again. And it took a long time for us to recognize what Stokely Carmichael and a whole lot of other people knew, was that Israel had been a brutal actor. And since 48, the brutality is not well recognized. We get Madison Avenue style news reporting, the same way that we've been conditioned to think that Ukraine was the bad force when actually.
Yeah, your time's up. Thank you, Norma. Yeah, we're moving on. So Bill, it's Bill Balderston's turn, and then it's answers, and then we'll take take another stack in a few minutes.
First, let me thank all the speakers for wonderful presentations. Zach and I have worked together in DSA and Labor for Palestine, and I certainly appreciate all of the writings that both the other speakers have done. I also would like to encourage people to read the work by Professor Khalidi, the 100 Years War on Palestine. Two quick questions. One is that it's clear in the last few days, but this has been true all along, that we have to put this in the context of a regional struggle. It's not just Zionists against Palestinians. The U.S. has banked so much on this approach for 2 decades or more. And now it's in shambles. You know, you don't just have to go back to the Lebanese Civil War to realize what could happen. And so I wonder how what projections come out of this. And the second thing is the demand that I do not hear enough, but I think should be central to our work, in addition to the ceasefire, is for a democratic, secular country. It could be federated, but the 2-state solution, I think, is dead in the water. And one can look at the polls and the response of Palestinians to the Palestinian Authority, the Oslo, projections. Those are going no place. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Okay, so now the challenge for our panelists is to answer those questions in 2 minutes. You want to start?
Sure. Just briefly on the Orientalism comment, I think we really need to look at the underlying racism of U.S. policy. I mean, if there were white Christians besieged and being bombed and killed by the thousands, I think we'd have a very different response, even if it was done by an ally. I mean, just looking at the double standards around, Russian, bombing Ukrainian cities and killing civilians. I mean, Russia's committing war crimes. We say you can't do that. You can't expand your territory by force. You can't kill civilians, et cetera, et cetera. Well, we're supporting because the victims are white Christians, and when Arab Muslims are being killed, that's the thing. And just the whole racist idea, the idea that saying, oh, we can't even allow you to have a mini state on the 22% left of Palestine. That's the 2-state solution that Arafat and Fatah, PLO, Palestine Authority, Palestine National Congress has agreed to. We can't even have that because you might threaten the occupier. That you guys are you're such savages. You're so, whatever. We have to keep you down. And think of the underlying racism in that attitude. I mean, it is. I mean, when you step back a moment, I mean, it usually takes black folks to point that out. Even white progressives sometimes can't get enough distance to realize just how fundamentally racist that very basic assumption in U.S. policy is, that self-determination, end of occupation, is not a given because you are so savage and violent. You might hurt the occupier if you get your rights, and so you have to be denied the rights. And so again, I would, and so we would look at the underlying things of U.S. policy. Let's not have anti-Semitism, that is exaggerated notions of Jewish power, be an excuse for covering up for the underlying racism, and that I think undergirds the U.S. policy. So thank you for raising the Orientalism question.
Okay, great. So I would just say, Bill, just speaking personally, I completely agree that a 2-state solution, if it was ever possible, is functionally unviable. And something I wanted to mention but didn't get to in my opening remarks is, part of the question here is how do we make, I think there's a lot of good analysis, a lot of good ideas in this room and around the country of, what to do. and what the US, should do and not do. And I think the big question is, how do we make our positions matter? How do we enforce them, right? David and I were talking about how, I think people have done some really impressive and moving and powerful in the sense of, moving to behold direct actions. But I think we have to be honest that it's become clear that if you just want to call it the left, whatever you want to call it, do not have the power right now to enforce our vision on US policy, right? We cannot get Biden to even back a permanent ceasefire, which is something that other US presidents have done in similar situations when Israel's gotten out of hand. They have stepped in and said that's enough, and we can't even get Biden to do that. And so I think, I'm not saying that to be a downer, but just to say that I do think that's part of why we have such an emphasis on labor, is we need to transform the American labor movement back into a fighting set of institutions that is willing to break the law, illegal strikes, right? It's not legal to strike in solidarity with Palestine, but if everyone does it, just like any other illegal strike, it's a lot harder to punish people for it. And that's going to take work and time. And that's why we're trying to go into these institutions to move them in a more democratic and militant direction. And I'll just say, I'm talking a lot about labor. I don't think that I'm not like that kind of person. I think there's other places you can do these struggles. You can do them in politics. You can do them. I think tenant organizing holds a lot of promise right now. But I'm talking about labor because that's what I'm familiar with. And obviously it's a place where you can really hurt the ruling class because we live in a capitalist society. But I think that I just want to end with, I think that's how we can make our ideas have some force behind them.
Other than labor or left or anything, which is that it's an indigenous people's struggle, and that we could connect with other indigenous people, support them, land back to the natives here. It also would apply to land back in Palestine. So it's another way of looking at it.
Yeah, and just to elaborate real quick on my points about the underlying racism. River to the sea, the expression that was by leftist nationalist group from the early 70s, talking about a democratic secular state. Yet politicians have insisted that it means you want to kill all the Jews, because the idea, well, Palestinians are inherently so savage that they couldn't live together, right? And the thing, the racist assumption, it's like saying free South Africa means you want to kill all the whites. I mean, there are some extremist Palestinians who would probably like to kill all the Jews, just like there are some extremist blacks in South Africa. But again, to represent that as sort of the norm. Similarly, the word intifada, it simply means shaking off. The vast majority of intifadas, including the uprisings of the Arab Spring, independent struggles in Western Sahara, the Lebanese resistance to Syrian domination, they're all called intifadas. They're overwhelmingly nonviolent. The first intifada, despite the iconic stone thrower, was 90% nonviolent. Only the second intifada was significantly violent. And yet again, we say, well, intifada means genocide. In fact, that's how Stefanik began this charge that supposedly people were talking about genocide at Ivy League campuses, was because they were using the word intifada, and 2 university presidents lost their jobs because of it. Unfortunately, my union president, Randy Weingarten, piled on saying that intifada means mass killing and violence and things like that, and she wouldn't take it back even when Arabic speakers said no, that wasn't the case. Yeah, my union, the AFT, is still very much in the Albert Schenker, very pro, super pro Israel. They've had horrible resolutions, and even denying agency, saying Hamas is just carrying out the agenda of Iran and Syria, which is ironic given that they actually supported the Syrian rebels, not this Iranian-backed Syrian government. So I've been having big fights in my union, but we can change things. I just to give you an idea, DSA actually was formally formed, not in the 1930s, but formally started in 1981 with a merger with a DSOC, Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, with New American Movement. I was a charter member, but I quit when I read in their charter that they supported military aid to Israel. So just an idea of how far we've come, that the all social democrats have actually moved to the left, not just on Israel, but on other things. But again, it's underscoring that yes, we can change unions, we can change organizations, we can make a difference.
I'm going to read the questions from the chat, and we're getting short on time. So I'm going to read the questions on the chat, and we'll have brief answers, and then I'll take all the rest of the speakers, and then we'll see how much time we have for closing. Is that okay with you guys? Yeah. Okay. So here's all the questions from the chat. Can the panelists quote some of the starkly racist comments, announcements from Israeli politicians and military that we never hear in mainstream social media? Please comment on Israel's drive to completely depopulate Gaza, which now includes suggestions for voluntary immigration, in quotes, by Palestinians to countries in Africa and elsewhere. What can be said about escalating Israeli attacks in the West Bank? Please comment on the polls, which show that about 2/3 of Americans want a ceasefire, yet our elected officials from Congress to city councils don't seem to want to represent us, in quotes. I think you mentioned that one already, though. What are some ways we might leverage the fact that most people do want to have a ceasefire? Do you agree that activists in the United States should only show solidarity with those resisting oppression and never criticize their forms of resistance? If so, is it inappropriate to mention, as Professor Zunes did mention, that Hamas represses Palestinian leftists in the area under their control? And one last one, which is actually a comment. It would be great to have it stressed that the apartheid Zionist Stat 6 state, oh, I see, it's a typo. Thank you. The apartheid Zionist state has been committing its genocidal program of ethnic cleansing for over 75 years. The problem did not start on October 7th. And thank you to all the speakers on the panel and in the audience. So we'll try to answer those, and then I'll
just real briefly, and just to add on to the things about the disconnect between political opinion and Biden and others. If defending the Palestinians is not enough to get your liberal friends involved in opposing Biden's policy, point out the fact this is going to cost him the election, is going to bring us Trump. I mean, seriously, support among Arab Americans has dropped from 59% to 19%. He is now losing in Michigan, a key swing state, which has a large Arab population. His popularity among young people have gone down to 25%. And as a political scientist, I can tell you that the key difference, whether Democrats win or lose, is youth turnout. When it's high, they win. When it's low, they lose. And there's a lot of alienation. There's going to be a lot of third-party voting. There's going to be a lot of non-voting. And even those who do vote for him are not going to go door to door. You know, you need that young energy to get out the vote, that kind of thing. You're not going to see that now because of what Biden is doing. So, you know, that this is, I mean, so, you know, this literally could, you know, lead to a Trump presidency. And just as Hubert Humphrey lost in 1968 because of his support for the Vietnam War, John Kerry lost in 2004 because of his support for the Iraq War. Indeed, Hillary Clinton lost because of her support for the Iraq War. And so, you know, this is real. This is serious, folks. And we're in California, so we can safely not vote or vote third party or, you know, whatever, you know. But no, in swing states, this is going to make the key difference. And, you know, hopefully the threat of this might get people to turn around. For the first time, politicians are actually having to look over both shoulders, not just the pro-Israel camp. They're realizing that they're losing their base. And, you know, if you're going to win, you can't lose your base. So I just wanted to mention that briefly. And I like to comment on the others, but I want to give to other people. Briefly, the West Bank, you know, because of the tension on Gaza, we're not seeing the escalation, hundreds of killings of civilians in the past few months. And they say we're going after Hamas, but that's baloney. They just one example, one of many examples. They raided the Freedom Theater in Jenin. Jenin, the Freedom Theater, as you know, is a left-wing operation, secular operation. They've actually been attacked by Palestinian Islamists over the years. But the Israelis came in, arrested the artistic director, arrested another staff member, totally trashed the place, including destroying every computer. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that's going on every day there. And just a little side, yeah, I do think it's legitimate if you're going to have reactionary groups that are suppressing leftists and killing people, civilians. I think it's perfectly okay to criticize that, because it does not help the liberation struggle. In fact, it hurts the liberation struggle.
Great. Yeah, I would say on the question of how we leverage public opinion, not to be a broken record, but I just think a mistake that's been made on the left over the last few decades for a number of reasons is eschewing organization, eschewing working with other people in person and struggling through differences together. And I do think that's one thing I really like about DSA is we're a democratic organization. And so if someone wants us to do something, you put it forward to the group and we make a decision together. And I think that's a muscle we need to rebuild on the left. And I think that people are coming together to do that. But I think that's not a short-term solution, but I think that is how we make our opinions matter, is we come together in organizations capable of flexing political muscle and hitting capital where it hurts. So I think we're going to just have to keep building our organizations to do that. And then I do think the question of, being critical of, different movements or organizations that might be critical of or countering, the interests of U.S. imperialism is definitely an interesting one. I don't personally spend much time on it, because I think what's supposed to matter, is technically we're supposed to live in a democracy and the United States government's supposed to be responsive. And so I just try to focus on the US's role in, these kinds of conflicts. And so I think it's really important to, technically that's what we're supposed to have control and agency over, right? So that's where I put most of my fire is, I don't want the United States government sending weapons all over the world. There's never really been an instance of them doing that. I guess since like Lend-Lease, since they were doing that on the right side of a conflict. So, it's been like 90 years since the US was sending arms to the right side. So I think we can just criticize that, criticize the US military budget. And I think that way we're not giving any fodder to people who want to, equate the whole Palestinian liberation struggle to just one organization. So that's just my 2 cents, but I definitely understand where people are coming from in terms of not wanting to come across as, cheerleaders for any particular, Palestinian organization.
I just wanted, somebody asked about genocidal quotes from Israeli politicians, and I've got a Word document at home with like 50 of them, and they're really horrifying. But I didn't bring it, so I can't give them to you. Anybody who's interested in working with Jewish Voice for Peace, come and see me before you go, okay?
I've got a stack here. Laura, you're actually on it. I have James Van, so come on up. There you are, waiting. James Van Wind, who I thought I saw, said she left. Okay, no Wind. James Van, Laura Wells, Dave Campbell, Stan, and Evan Tracy. Is there anyone else? Okay, so what's your name? Michael.
Thanks to the panelists for some very insightful comments and information. Thank you. I have 2 questions. I'm James Van of Peace and Freedom. My 2 questions. One is, of all the Western nations, the U.S. is way out front in being the most avid supporter of Israel. Is there anything we can do to change that relationship? My second question is, I was really delighted. I don't know why it took so long, but I was really delighted when South Africa filed charges against Israel for war crimes. And I'm so I'm really delighted that that happened. I wish it had been some closer Western country that did that. But how do you assess South Africa as being the appropriate body to bring these charges against Israel?
It's a bit Laura Wells. And one thing I wanted to announce is that there's a film, Israelism, which some of you may have already seen. But on Sunday at the New Parkway, which is on 24th Street in Oakland at noon, tomorrow it will be shown, Israelism. It's about some people who went there and found, so, you know, Jewish people who went there, found out what was happening and changed their mind about their support of Israel. And my question has to do with, among other interviews that I've heard and all, I've just recently heard George Galloway interviewing Dan Kovalik. And they said the only choices are, and then they listed Biden and Trump and the RFK Jr. And so what can we do to have people start listing that there is, on a national, peace and freedom is really strong in California. On the national level, really, it's Jill Stein. And I wish that they would say that, but they say there's nobody to vote for. And you go, Jill Stein, you know, so how can we get that to happen so people know there's a choice? That's it. Oh, also our voter registration numbers, as Stan Wood said, are rising because we have the values people want. Both parties.
So yeah, sort of piggybacking on what Laura Wells just said, I was just listening to all the great things that DSA is doing, and just wrote lamenting the fact that DSA is doing all these great things while still doing its electoral operations within the Democratic Party, which is the enemy. Because there's a party on the ballot in California that has DSA's exact platform, where you could actually be integrating all the other stuff that you're doing with your electoral work and not have them be at odds with each other. The party that I'm talking about, of course, is Peace and Freedom, which is in desperate need of a membership organization like DSA to do its operations within Peace and Freedom and build that party. So just throwing that out there.
Give it to Stan.
Okay. Earlier on in your talk, Stephen Zunes, you mentioned something, and I agree with you that one should be very cautious how you don't, however, accidentally, inadvertently fall into you said anti-Semitic tropes. I would disagree with the term anti-Semitic because Arab people are Semitic people also. But you made something, and maybe I misunderstood you, that said there was disproportionately no more Jewish people than Presbyterians in Hollywood, and I don't think that's accurate. Okay, and then okay. I mean, like for example, as an Irish American, like this pub, unfortunately, many of my brethren are in police departments, but doesn't mean that all Irish Americans are pro-police. But so my question is, though, American Israel Political Action Committee, it's not to be in the least anti-Jewish to state the fact it is the most powerful lobby in the U.S. There's no question about that, in my view. And I think you can oppose that. And I just want to throw it out to you or anybody else. I think you can oppose that without falling into Jews control of the world or Jews control U.S. electoral politics. But all over the country, in my home state of West Virginia, where I'm originally from, there's a state legislator, Arab American, Lebanese Christian background, like 3 generations back, who made some cautious statement that maybe we should call for a permanent ceasefire. Guess what? They're now giving $800,000 to a candidate in a rural county in West Virginia to destroy him. I mean, so one can acknowledge that without falling into the exaggerations. That's all I want to point out. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Evan. So yeah, my question, I think, kind of really goes to all of you, because it really it kind of gets at like this intersection between academia and labor, which is there's a number of people very close to me in academia who are themselves and feeling like a lot of their colleagues are very threatened because people are getting singled out by donors to academic institutions and basically getting blacklisted. You know, their jobs, and you know, some of these people are they're here on a visa. They have children. You know, they're people of color themselves. You know, they're Jews themselves. Like they're all of these people in vulnerable positions that should be able to be speaking up, and you know, their livelihoods and maybe their place in this country are at risk. And like, I don't know, just if anything any of you have to say about that. I think it's a really important and terrifying. I mean, this is Nazi shit. This is McCarthyism. This is like the most, yeah.
This is more of an announcement than a question, and I'm really hesitant to make it because I don't have time to say how much I don't believe in electoral politics. But I'm not as good as Zach is at fielding those interruptions and keeping my train of thought going. I'm just going to do the best I can. So I can talk louder. Thank you. So tagging on to what Laura said about how they keep saying the only choices are Trump and Biden and whoever else the other one was. Marianne Williamson is running in Democratic primaries against Biden on a platform that's as progressive, a little more progressive and a little more democratic socialist than Bernie Sanders was. She's for a ceasefire. So there would be and this isn't even against voting for a third party, if you believe in that, because in the primaries at the presidential level in March, you could vote for an opponent to Biden who's running as a Democrat, won't split the votes. And so for those to whom that makes sense, check her out. She, in 2020, when she was visible because she was in the debates, she was marginalized as a New Age flake, which was total slander. She's a tough cookie, and that's not where her spirituality happens to lie. This now, since the DNC has made sure there are no debates, she's being what she's called invisibilized by the same media. So, like I said, with all the caveats about electoral politics and the Democratic Party, still within the context of trying to get the word out and finding ways to protest, you might want to check her out. Who's next?
I just wanted to know what Evan was saying. Can you hear me? No, this doesn't work.
No, it's for the Zoom.
Oh, it's for the Zoom. Okay. Do I have to press the button?
No.
No button. Okay. I teach at a private art school in the Bay Area, and one of my colleagues right now is being taken to court, is being the overlords of the institution are trying to terminate her because donors who have relations to AIPAC are pulling money out of the school. This woman is the chair of critical ethnic studies. She is a Black woman. She is a brilliant scholar, and she needs support right now. She needs help paying legal fees that are very quickly starting to pile up. She has kids. She's taking care of her mom. And California College of the Arts right now, this is happening right now in real time as of like 10 minutes ago when I was texting frantically with my other colleagues about this. She made one post on Instagram in support of a ceasefire, and other Jewish, I am also Jewish. This is breaking my fucking heart, what is happening. Some other Jewish colleagues saw that this woman posted this thing about a ceasefire, and they went straight to a donor who has affiliations with AIPAC, and he is pulling money and he is publishing articles about California College of the Arts in the Israeli Times and in some other online digital media, whatever's, about how he has very deep pockets and he has every intention to destroy the institution completely, as well as seek out any other faculty who have been vocal in support of Palestine. And I know that there's all sorts of this witch hunt going on where there's plagiarism committees being formed, and anyone who is speaking up within academia in the classroom for peace, for a ceasefire, for decolonization, for equity is being hunted, and our jobs are at risk. I don't know what to do. I truly don't know what to do because I can't lose my job, but I feel like I need to speak out for my colleague who is on the verge of being fired for making one comment. This is in the Bay Area. This is at California College of the Arts in San Francisco. This is happening. Sorry? What do we do?
Rise up, fight back. So
Okay, so, well, I think two things that are interesting, just to say something slightly different, and maybe David will say more about this, but I do think the question about, America being a uniquely strong bastion of support for Israel among even other Western imperialist countries, I do think, in addition to other things we've been talking about building, powerful organizations that can fight back against that, is the work that groups like JVP and If Not Now are doing, which is organizing American Jews to be critical of the occupation, to be, in the case of JVP, anti-Zionist. And so I do think that to Professor Zunes' point earlier, there are a lot of well-intentioned people who are just relying on, their Jewish friend to tell them what they should think about this. And I think that if we remove that pillar of the reproduction of support for Israel from the American Jewish community, that is a key area of public support that is eroding, and that I think through organizations like JVP and If Not Now is eroding more quickly. And then on the DSA question about electoral politics, I think I'm a member of the Peace and Freedom Party, pretty sure I'm registered. I'll say I'm just not someone who spends time on electoral politics. Candidates from any political party can submit the DSA questionnaire and ask for an endorsement from DSA. We're an independent political organization. We're not affiliated with any political party, so anyone could try to get our endorsement. So I would just say that. And in the Bay Area, we don't have any members of Congress who are DSA members. We have people like Javanka Beckles, people from the Richmond Progressive Alliance, people on the Oakland School Board. Those are more the kinds of candidates that we're supporting. So some of them aren't even, well, I don't think everyone in the RPA is a Democrat, and I think a lot of the school boards are nonpartisan. Yeah, so I think, most of the people, at least locally, that we're putting time and energy into supporting either aren't Democrats or are out of, basically convenience for the ballot line access. But I would say if Peace and Freedom Party candidates are interested in being endorsed by DSA, they should submit the questionnaire. Maybe you have been, but that's what I would say.
I don't have anything specific, but this has been a really valuable meeting for me, and just confirms what I came in with this is not a drill. Fascism is here, and we can't hold back. So everybody go out and do what you can.
Okay, first of all, I want to clarify that I didn't say AIPAC didn't have that influence. I didn't say they weren't doing these things. In fact, I specifically said that we're an unprecedented level of political, repression, or at least in the past 60 years or so. And so I was not denying that AIPAC and their allies can censor people, fire people, and occasionally defeat a progressive member of Congress. That's very different than saying U.S. policy would be different as a result. They're making it more difficult to change U.S. policy. That was my point. Not that, but they did not create U.S. policy. It's not the cause. That's underlying imperialism and everything else that I was mentioning. Because remember, every time a president's taken on AIPAC, they've won. Eisenhower in the Suez crisis, Carter in the first invasion of Lebanon, Reagan in the AWACS sale, Bush Sr. in the loan guarantees, Obama in the Iran nuclear deal. You know, the president has that kind of authority. And where they have the impact is again making it more difficult to challenge things. And also really probably the most powerful influence, and if you want in terms of outside the national security establishment, are right-wing fundamentalists. The 40 million evangelicals who believe that modern Israel is God's creation of the original Israelite kingdom. The Palestinians are the Philistines. We know whose side God is on, and we need to have a strong, dominant Israel for Christ to come again, where he'll kill all the Jews, but they can be raptured. You know, no, seriously, they are these are the people who wrote the two people who wrote the BDS laws. If you look at the Arkansas, look at all the BDS laws. Who are the two groups that pushed it? It wasn't AIPAC. It was right-wing Christian fundamentalists and ALEC. You know, ALEC, the right-wing, you know why? Because they got through, once that got through and upheld by the courts, they've now passed in Texas a law that says not only you can't boycott Israel, you can't boycott carbon polluters. You can't boycott gun manufacturers. These are the laws in the books now. They were using the Israel issue as a wedge to get in. And again, that's why the fascist warning is important. That this and what I was mentioning earlier about possible wars in Iran or Venezuela, that this struggle right now, again, goes beyond Israel and Palestine. It goes beyond the struggle in Gaza. This is about the future direction of the country and the world, and it's more important than ever that those of us who have a more systemic, progressive analysis be in the forefront of the struggle. And I'm really, again, despite the strategy going on, I'm really excited to see the kind of energy we saw at the rally earlier today. We're seeing here in this room. And please continue. Aluta continua.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for all the passion and devotion. And I hope that we really can win. I want to thank everyone for participating in this Suds, Snacks, and Socialism Forum. Our forums take place usually on the first Saturday of most months. The next forum will be February 3rd. It will be about the recall campaign against Alameda County DA Pamela Price. You can sign up to get forum announcements by requesting to do so in the chat or by emailing us at info@sudssnackssocialism.org. You can sign up on our sign-up sheet and buy books.